Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'll just give a minute or two more and then we'll get started. Right, I think we'll get going. So yeah, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Really good to have you with us today. So our webinar today is on what you need to know when employing staff for the first time. Please do feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know who you are and what organisation you're coming from. We're really proud to be working today in partnership with Atkinson HR, who are one of our HR trusted suppliers. Yeah, this is a really important topic. So really glad to have you all with us. On to the next slide. So just a bit of housekeeping before we get started. Apologies to those of you who have heard this a few times before if you've been on our webinars previously. So there won't be a break during today's session, but if you do need to step away from your screen for any reason, please do feel free to do so. I hope you have a coffee or a drink in hand. You will notice that closed captions or subtitles have been enabled. To turn these on or off, please click on the CC icon in the toolbar at the bottom of the screen. You can also adjust the size of them. You'll see that your microphones have been automatically muted to prevent any background noise, and your cameras are also turned off. Today's event is being recorded, so by being here, you are consenting to it being recorded, and we will be circulating a copy of the recording and the slides by email next week. We're also going to be adding a copy of the slides to the chat, so you should have them ready. I'm not expecting any fire alarms where I am, but please do keep an eye out for any fire alarms where you are. And finally, yeah, this is a safe space, so please do respect each other in the chat. You can add any comments or reflections in the chat, but we would ask that you submit any questions for our speakers via the Q&A function. And we will leave time to answer those questions at the end of the webinar. Moving on to the next slide. I just wanted to set the scene a bit in terms of why we've chosen to cover this topic today. So we have a small charity help desk at NCVO, and perhaps surprisingly or unsurprisingly, I don't know, HR and people management is one of the top content areas that come through on our small charity help desk. We're guessing that the reason for that a lot of the time is that most small charities don't have access to dedicated HR support. And it's often, as I'm sure is no surprise to you all, an add-on to the job of the CEO and all the trustees. Having said that, we also know that people are an organisation's most important asset. So making sure that you are set up to support them properly is really important, and just as important for small charities as it is for large ones. So we hope that the webinar today will offer you some expertise in that space. Moving on to the next slide. So just in terms of our agenda, so we're doing a bit of welcome and housekeeping now. We will move on in a few minutes to hear from Graham from Atkinson HR about the practical considerations for employing staff for the first time, but equally you might already have staff, and this might be a really useful reminder of what we think you should have in place. We'll then hear from Salma, who's from One Roof Leicester, which is one of NCVO member organisations, and she's going to talk a little bit about what she learnt when going through the process of having a member of staff for the first time. or of being a member of staff for the first time. And then we're going to do something that we've done in our last webinar, which is a bit of what we call a fireside chat between Graham and Salma, with Graham asking Salma a few questions before we head into the Q&A, where we'll obviously be answering any of your questions. And then at about 1:25, for the last 5 minutes, we'll do some closing comments and some signposting to some further resources. Moving on to the next slide. So just in case you don't know, and sometimes people don't necessarily know about us when they join these webinars. So we are the largest network for charities and volunteering. We're really proud to represent over 17,000 voluntary organisations of all sizes across the UK. Our members range from the kind of big medical research charities to those local amateur sports clubs. And at their heart, what joins all of our members together is that they all have the aim of making the world around them a better place. Just a little bit about our membership. We know that a lot of non-members join us for these webinars. So on to the next slide in terms of what you can get as an NCVO member. So you can save time and money, which I think is often in short supply, particularly if you're a small charity. So as a member, you get access to information and guidance, downloadable tools and templates, discounted training, and some of our fantastic research. It is only members that have complete access to everything that we offer. And the most important thing to say is that if you're a small charity with an income of under 30K, membership is free. So to get us into the meat of the content today, we're going to do a quick poll to get us started and just to understand a bit more about where you are coming from and what your position is. So the question is, do you currently employ staff? No, we don't employ staff. No, but we're looking to do so soon. Yes, we have our first member of staff, or yes, we have a small staff team. So feel free to, if you can answer it as a poll question, that would be great, so that we have all the answers coming through. Just seen someone put a response in the chat. Just wait for that to come through. Okay, so probably unsurprisingly, most people on this call, 47%, are actually looking to employ staff soon. And some of you also have, a significant proportion of you also have a small staff team, 42%. And then only 5% are with their first member of staff, and only 5% don't have anyone. So thank you for that, really helpful. I'm now going to hand over to Graham.
Brilliant, thank you, Josie, and hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining today. I'm Graham from Atkinson HR. So it's really good to see the breakdown there in terms of the kind of those of you who've got a small team in place, those of you who are considering or looking to appoint your first member of staff. Hopefully, we've kind of designed the content in a way that it's that this works for everyone. So it's a chance to think about some of the key issues, but also for those of you with small teams already in place to sense check that you've got some of those basics in place and that you're doing the right things, and hopefully provide a bit of reassurance around that. So just to start off, I'm not going to do a hard sell, but I'm just going to spend 1 minute kind of introducing Atkinson HR, which is the next slide, please. So we are a small strategic HR consultancy. Hopefully some of you have heard about us. We are a trusted partner with NCVO, trusted supplier, and have worked together with NCVO for about 3 years, now. We provide support, essentially helping values-based organizations to become even better employers. So that can include helping organizations, helping charities predominantly, to recruit effectively, induct, manage performance, get the right pay and reward frameworks in place. And we do a lot of work with small to medium-sized organizations that they make up about 80% of our clients. The good news is, as kind of NCVO members, so for those of you that are NCVO members, you get a 10% discount on any of our rates as part of that partnership. You also are entitled to a free hour, 1 hour consultation as well. So if there is anything where you might have HR issues or you might want to think about how you get the best out of your people, feel free to get in touch. So let's dive into the content then. So if we can go on to the first onto the first slide. So I'm going to talk about a number of things over the next 25, 30 minutes. I'm going to talk about kind of I suppose, the really core operational issues for you to think about, the really practical elements of employing people for the first time, including kind of the legal frameworks, kind of what the situation is in terms of payroll, pension, policies, some of those core things to think about. And then I'm also going to spend a little bit of time thinking about kind of the longer term kind of development and how to make it really work effectively for you. So, how do you make sure that you get it right in terms of recruitment, induction, managing performance? So if we start off with the kind of some of the key basics. So in terms of the legal position, if I was in a position where I was thinking, right, as a charity, I'm a trustee, we're considering employing our first member of staff. A starting point is you need to register as an employer. So there's a link here. Again, hopefully you'll all be able to click through to this on the slide deck, where you need to register with HMRC as an employer. That can take up to 20 days. Ideally, you'd complete that before you employed somebody, but you can register. You can start the process before somebody starts and then complete it after. But ideally, you would want to be completing that before your first employee joins your organization. Right to work checks. So again, I'm not going to go into some of these in detail, but there's a legal requirement for employers to ensure eligibility around right to work in the UK. There's some guidance there in terms of exactly what that looks like and the information that you need. Anybody that you employ has a legal right to a written statement of employment for day one. Yeah. So again, you just need to think about a basic contract of employment. I'll talk a little bit more when I get onto policies about where you can find some of this stuff as well. And the other thing in terms of a legal requirement, again, before you employ your first person, is insurance. Again, I'm sure some of your organizations may already have insurance for some of your activities or some of the services that you provide. So in that case, you may just want to speak to your insurance provider about extending that policy, or you may need to look for a new insurance policy that includes employer's liability. The standard for that is £5 million cover. Okay, so let's click onto the next slide. So the next place that I would go when you're thinking about, right, we're looking at employing somebody for the first time, is the requirements around actually paying them and what that looks like. So again, for those of you that don't know, there is legislation around the minimum wage, around the national living wage, it's called, and the rate for that for employees over 21 is £12.21 at present. That obviously some of you, again, depending on what kind of role you decide to bring people into, may be paying more than that, but that's the minimum requirement. One of the things that I often kind of talk to clients about when they're looking at employing staff for the first time is around actually really thinking about the budget, because it's not uncommon. So you might think about, right, okay, we've decided we want to pay this person £30,000 a year. So that's the salary. So that's the budget. Whereas actually, it's really important to think about some of the wider costs that kind of go on to that. So I'm going to talk to you in a minute about, that person will have pension entitlement, there'll be national insurance payments, there will be the cost of equipment, possibly the cost of travel, there might be costs of recruitment, Um, they're often referred to as on costs in terms of things like national insurance and pension. Again, this will vary depending on your charity, but generally, I would be suggesting that you want to be adding kind of 20 to 25% onto your salary cost for these kind of wider on costs. Potentially a little bit more if the cost of recruiting or travel or equipment is likely to be a little bit higher. And then again, a really practical consideration is, right, how are we actually going to pay this person? So again, if your charity already has somebody who supports in terms of finances, so if you have an accountant, it's likely probably that your accountant would offer some kind of payroll service. Ours does. So we're a small business. We employ 12 people. Our accountant runs our payroll for us. And that includes she will work out how much tax and national insurance we need to deduct. She will tell us when we need to pay HMRC and what we need to pay them. She will issue pay slips to staff and make sure that we're making the correct calculations and payments. If you don't use your accountant, you can get in-house software to do this. So again, if you have the skills perhaps within your trustee board and you want to keep that in-house initially, you can do that using your own software. Or there are a number of payroll bureaus. So again, there's specific organizations who are set up who focus on providing a payroll service to small organizations, to small businesses. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. Okay, so I mentioned pension already, and again, pension is sometimes one of the things that people worry about or think it can appear quite complex. Again, actually, it can be relatively straightforward pension. So again, there is a requirement if you're not aware to auto-enroll employees. So if you're employing somebody who is eligible, so they're aged between 22 and the state pension age, and they're earning at least 10,000 per year and working in the UK, then they should be automatically enrolled. Basically, you should set them up on a pension scheme, and then if they wish to withdraw, then they have to withdraw from that rather than them opting in to a scheme. You will need to think about what you want to do in terms of pension provision. Again, I think the most common option and probably the simplest is to use the government nest scheme. But again, you can choose to use a private provider like a stakeholder pension scheme if that's preferable. The minimum employer contribution is 3%. So again, the way it works is that the the employee has to contribute a certain amount. So again, the standard minimum statutory amount is the employee has to contribute a minimum of 5% of their salary and the employer 3%. As long as there's an 8% contribution, so you may as an employer choose to pay more into the pension. So for example, if you wanted to contribute a minimum of 5%, say, or you wanted to contribute 8% of salary, then you can do that. You can choose to pay more. Again, I would say most organizations start off paying the statutory, and then potentially as you grow, you might want to revisit that and consider that. Again, I've said earlier, make sure that that's factored into your overall budget and costings when you're employing somebody. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, so this is something that comes up quite a bit, actually, in terms of what policies do we need, and what kind of procedures do we need to be able to employ somebody. And actually, from a legal point of view, there is very little that is specifically designated in law as you are required to have this policy in place when you first employ somebody. There's some policies that kind of kick in once you kind of grow a little bit, so have 5 or more employees. But when I'm asked, what are the really core policies that we should start off with if we're going to employ some people, this is the list of where I would start. So obviously, there's a requirement around having a disciplinary and grievance procedure. So what happens if if there's concerns with somebody's conduct? What happens if somebody has a complaint or a concern regarding their employment? A basic procedure to enable you to manage that. Obviously, again, a really good starting point, having a health and safety policy. Again, something basic that sets out What's our approach to health and safety, to making sure that people are safe? Again, depending on your charity, on your organization, on the type of activity that you would do, will influence what that health and safety policy looks like. It might be focused on physical safety. There might be an element of lone working potentially, again, especially if you're looking at taking on your first member of staff. But just thinking about what are the key risks in your organization and how you have a policy that sets out your position and how you manage that. Some form of equality and diversity policy that ensures and sets out how you meet your duties under the Equality Act. Again, for some of you, I'm sure that safeguarding will be a really key policy, again, especially if you're working with children or vulnerable people. A data protection and confidentiality policy to make sure you're compliant with GDPR, and also thinking in that about your kind of ICO registration, Information Commissioner's Office. Sickness and absence policy. Again, how do you handle it if your employee is unwell and or unable to work? And then whistleblowing. So what to do if there's a serious complaint? So again, if somebody has concerns around fraudulent activity or seriously inappropriate behaviors, for example, how can that be raised? So this is where I would start. So if you're thinking, right, what do we need to make sure is in place for somebody starting or very early within their employment? This is the list of policies. This is almost a checklist I would be using. If we then go on to the next slide, this has got some of the policies which I would almost view as being, these are really important. These might be tier 2. So these might be the kind of policies where you get your first staff member in post and then you say to them, look, there's some extra policies that we need to work out. We'd like your help in terms of getting these in place and getting them in position. Okay. So these cover things like flexible working, parental policies, expenses, IT, social media, modern slavery. Again, these are not definitive kind of checklists in terms of, right, this is the order at which you must do them. So for some of your charities, depending on your context, depending on kind of your risks based on the type of work that you do, some of these may be slightly more important to prioritize. But this is generally where I'd be advising clients to focus in terms of their effort. The good news on all of this is that you're not on your own with these. So, again, if I was designing these policies from scratch, and if in the first instance, all you need is something that's basic, fit for purpose, off the shelf, then I would be looking at NCVO. So some of these policies are available on the NCVO website. Obviously, the benefit of that is they are specifically tailored for voluntary sector organizations, or especially around things like disciplinary, grievance, whistleblowing. You can get examples of all of those on ACAS as well. Again, if it was me, I would probably start off with the NCVO templates, but have a look at what's on ACAS as well and say, actually, are there any bits from that I like that I just want to include in this in this policy? So let's go on to the next slide if that's okay. So I'm going to ask. I should have said at the start. I should have given the health warning, which is there's one or two bits of this session that I'd like to be interactive rather than you listening to my dulcet tones for half an hour. So, obviously, a key question. So, those of you who are on the call who've made the decision, right? We've decided as a trustee board that we want to bring in a staff team. What's that going to look like? I guess, where do you start? So, just for those of you who are in that position, I'd like you to just share and chat, please. What's your current thinking about the first role? What's the first role that you would employ into your charity? I'll just give you 30 seconds and then we'll have a look at what people have posted. Right, yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so we've got a few answers in there. So we've got probably the most common answer, which is what I was expecting would be CEO. Again, this will all depend on the size. So some charities may be really small and tiny, employing the staff for the first time. I worked with a charity last year who were employing a staff member for the first time, who were actually really well established charity, quite financially quite sustainable, had got a really strong, healthy culture in terms of volunteer leadership, but had made that decision to bring in a chief executive. Probably the most common answers I get to this question are either chief executive, charity manager, or administrator. Again, all of those are absolutely fine. Yeah, again, this is entirely dependent on your context, on what's right for you in terms of growth. Hopefully, the content we've got here is relevant for any of those roles. So I get, in terms of key questions, obviously, where do you start is a key issue. Again, for those of you thinking about bringing in somebody for the first time into the first employed role, I would be saying what I would want to do is think about the different options. So you may have settled already, you may have weighed up the pros and cons of different role, but just think about, right, okay, what would we do if it was a charity manager, an administrator, somebody a bit more senior, and just reflect on what the advantages and risks of each of those options are before making your final decision on where you start. I think there's something quite interesting in really thinking about as trustees and acknowledging the kind of impact that employing a staff member would have. And again, I don't want to make assumptions about where all of your charities are, where your organizations are in terms of this part of the journey. But for example, if you've got an established trustee board that are bringing somebody in, probably the trustees have been heavily involved in the operations of the charity and the doing in the detail, probably committing a fair bit of their time to that. Um, Sometimes it will be the case that there's a really close connection with the cause, with the work that you're doing, and that's why people are on the board. And I think sometimes I see it where bringing in a staff member does have an impact in terms of the dynamic of the charity because you're employing somebody who is doing this as a career choice. They are doing it as their work. So for them, it is 35 hours a week. I come to do my job to the best of my ability, but it's not my life. And I think, again, not for all charities, but for some charities that can have an impact in terms of, okay, well, what does that look like in terms of the professionalization of our charity? What does it look like in terms of the systems and processes? What does it look like for us as trustees? Because that might mean we have to step back a little bit from the day to day to allow the staff member to take on some of that responsibility. That may be really welcome. That might be the main reason that you're doing this. It also might sometimes be challenging or emotionally difficult to step back away from it a little bit. But I think thinking through that as trustees, having that conversation, kind of articulating that is quite important. Obviously, again, there's a really important consideration now about where are they going to work from? Are they going to be fully remote working? Is there going to be a shared office? Do you have a location where they're expected to work from? So again, just thinking about the pros and cons of those different options in terms of location of work. Thinking about the terms. So again, I think most organizations we work with when they're employing the first member of staff probably start out with quite a basic statutory offer in terms of things like the contract, holidays, pension contribution. And then maybe as they continue to look at that journey of growth and development, revisit that and review that. But there may be certain areas, again, depending on your context, where you need to think, right, okay, actually, what do we want to offer? Do we need to offer a slightly higher pension to be competitive? Do we need to offer a better holiday package? Again, I don't want to generalize because it's not always the case, but probably with most charities, there's a perception that we're not always able to compete with the private sector in terms of pay, but actually in terms of the wider benefits, the culture, the connection with purpose is where we're able to really kind of attract people to our roles and attract talent to come and work for us. And then where to go to benchmark again, I would, once you've made the decision on right, what role do we need to bring in that's going to help us in this next phase of our development as an organization? Thinking about where you go to compare, contrast. Probably charity job or NCVO again are the places that I would start. So have a look at some similar roles, have a look at the terms and conditions that they're offering, and then think about, right, how does that sit with us? How does that compare and contrast with us? Right, let's go to the next slide. So you've made those decisions, you've answered those key questions. So the next job is, right, we need to recruit, we need to attract somebody to come and do this work. So again, a key starting point is the job description and job advert. Again, I'd really appreciate just some feedback in terms of the chat and comments around, from your perspective, what do you think makes a good job description? So if everybody could just share kind of thought and reflection on what you think makes a good job description. I'm going to keep on talking while you share some of those thoughts. My starting point with this is, again, what I said before, which is all of the evidence shows us that purpose, culture, values continues to be more and more important when people are making their choice about their next employer. Obviously, things like salary are important because people need to live and pay the mortgage and eat and be able to travel. But in terms of convincing them about why come work for us, an advert that sells your purpose, that sells your values, that sells the positive work that you do, I think is a real opportunity, especially within our sector, right? If we can't sell our purpose and values to kind of people who are interested in coming to work for us, then we're definitely doing something wrong. Thinking about where to advertise. So again, I don't want to be particularly prescriptive about this because I'm very conscious that in different contexts there will be different answers to this. So in some circumstances, you may have internal networks, you may have people who volunteered for your organization who where you want to appeal and you kind of want to potentially attract people who know the charity already into that first staff role. I'm not going to sit here and say that's wrong and that every organization must go through an external open recruitment, because it depends on your circumstances. Again, what I think you should do is weigh up the benefits and risks, because there are some benefits of bringing in people that in terms of get up and running quickly, understand the charity. It might be lower risk if there's a lesser, if they're not an unknown quality. Also, there can be benefits of running an external process where you might advertise more widely, go through kind of interviews, and bring in some external expertise, fresh perspective. So really think about the benefits and risks and be really objective about that. What I absolutely do think that you must do, depending on your context, is be really conscious and careful about how you manage conflicts of interest, how you are really transparent, how you are really objective. So, for example, if there is somebody, if you are a trustee and there's close relationships and there's family or a family member or a friend who might be interested in the role, be really conscious about that conflicts of interest. Like, you want any process to be seen to be transparent, objective, that somebody external could look at it and say, this is a fair process, this is an objective process, and people have acted with integrity. So I think be really conscious of that. If there's potential conflicts, remove yourself from that process, and if they're conflicts that aren't manageable within that circumstance. And then I guess just a bit of an operational point around, again, really thinking about what are your core requirements for this role. Again, one of my challenges often to clients is to really think hard about having a focused person specification. So if you see a job where you've got, a shopping list of requirements, in terms of knowledge, experience, skills, you've got a checklist with 25 items on it, like that human bit, so we're looking for somebody who's exceptionally organized, very creative, very strategic, but detail, got a good eye for detail. Like if you've got a long list of these things, this human being does not exist, right? So all we're doing is we're narrowing our pool. And also, again, all of the evidence shows us that, if a white man looks at that person spec with 25 items on and goes through it and see that they meet 50% of it, they are much more likely to apply for that and think, well, I'll submit an application anyway, than say a woman or person of color who, if they don't meet all of those criteria, are much less likely to apply. So we know that having long shopping list person specifications that is damaging in terms of diversity and inclusion. So really think hard about trustees. As if we had to limit this list to kind of 5 or 6 things, what are we really looking for from this person? And actually, where are we happy to support their development and growth in the role? Let's move on to the next slide. I see we've got some great points in there as well from on the chat around what a great job description looks like. So thank you for sharing those. So penultimate slide from me. So in terms of developing performance, we've talked about job description, so I'm not going to revisit that. The key thing is, and again, sadly, this is one of the areas where I see it sometimes go wrong. So really, really important, really fundamental, right at the outset, to have honest, open conversations about objectives, priorities, expectations. Sometimes that can be a little bit uncomfortable, but for the trustees to have an honest conversation with your first member of staff around, right, what are your expectations from us as trustees? What do you think we should expect from you? And actually, here are our expectations in terms of what you achieve and what you're going to be focused on, how you can start to develop and mold and build this role. So I would be suggesting that you have smart objectives and priorities that are agreed with your new staff member, that you have those in writing, that you review them regularly. And I'd maybe do that at increments. So to start with, maybe 1 month, what will you have achieved in the first month? What will you have achieved in the first 3 months? What will you have achieved in the first 6 months? Maybe. Again, this is one that often gets missed, actually, but really thinking about as trustees what your delegated authority is. So, what are the decisions that you are going to delegate to the new staff member that you're employing? What is it that you expect them to make decisions on? What are the things that you expect them to bring to you as trustees? So, whether that's about financial limits. So again, it's quite common in charities to see kind of a scheduler delegation where, okay, for decisions up to this value, then the staff member will make that decision. If it's above that value, they should bring it to trustees. So just think about what are those decisions, because that's important in terms of making sure somebody's able to have autonomy and freedom in their role. Yeah, so that they're working to some clear objectives and priorities, but actually they've got the freedom to get on with it and do some good work. I thought it was really important to include something about probation period. With the new employment rights bill, this is an area which is likely to get much more clearly defined, actually, in a legal sense. It is commonplace anyway, but it's not always necessarily defined. But where you would say to a new staff member, kind of this employment is subject to you successfully completing a 6-month probation, for example, and that at that 6 month point, you're saying, yeah, we're really happy with your progress. Your employment will continue. Yeah. Whereas, or if you're unhappy, or if they've not met objectives, or there's serious concerns, and you've given them that feedback and they've not responded to it, ending the employment at that point if they're not if it's not working. Okay. Thinking about how often you're going to catch up, who's going to be responsible for line management. So it's often the chair. Um, Sometimes charities might have a small kind of performance management committee where it might be the chair and deputy chair, or some if there's somebody on the board with HR experience, you might ask them to be involved in that. Again, I can't stress this point enough, and I know it's not always easy, but this point around feedback is so important. If there are things that when you've employed somebody and they've started, and there's things where you've got concerns, or there's things where you're thinking, actually, that's not quite what we expected, that honesty and ability to give feedback early and quickly so that somebody can say, yeah, okay, actually, I get that. I'm able to do this differently. One of the biggest pitfalls is there are some behaviors or things that aren't quite going to plan. The new staff member never gets the feedback. They don't get told by anybody that actually you would like to see you improve in this area. And then things escalate and get worse and become conflict, or become a grievance, or become an issue. And often I look at these situations and think, I really wish you'd just had this conversation kind of 3 months ago or 6 months ago, when you first observed the thing that's gone on to become an issue or a problem. So really challenge yourself to give kind of honest, supportive, constructive feedback to people that you employ. And then last slide from me. I think I'm okay in terms of timing. So there's just a final slide in terms of induction. So again, once you've decided you're going to employ somebody, you've run a recruitment process, you've kind of appointed somebody to the role. How do you help them to have the best possible start in terms of their employment with you? So again, there's some real basics in here. So thinking proactively, right, what equipment are they going to need? What software? How are they going to get what email system are we going to sign them up on? Are there any systems that we need them to be able to access to? How do we help them to understand our story as an organization, our history and background? Who are the key people they need to meet? What are our vision and goals? What are our expectations of them? What will help them build up their understanding of our work, of our community, of our network? Again, there's quite an operational point this, but carrying out a DSE assessment as well as part of this display screen equipment. So again, especially if this person's a remote worker, have they got what they need in terms of a desk, a workstation set up? I always think, again, by the time somebody's been in role, kind of probably at about the 3 month point, I want to be able to say to that new starter, do you feel like you have a really good understanding of kind of our work? Do you feel that you have a good understanding of our expectations of what success looks like in your job? Do you feel that you have a good understanding of our community, or the people that we serve, our beneficiaries, or our network? And broadly, if somebody can answer yes to those three questions, I think you've probably got to quite a good position in terms of your induction. Make sure that you're checking in regularly during this kind of induction period. That's so important. I think there is also a point, though, again, about being realistic about what you can do as trustees, and being honest about what you can do as trustees. You might have limited time and capacity. So, in an ideal world, you would have a new starter where you're giving them a pack of information, you're giving them a timetable, and you're saying, look, I've set up meetings with these key people in terms of our beneficiaries, our stakeholders, our trustees. You can go and meet them as part of your induction and have some real structure to help that person get up to a flying start, really get up and running quite quickly. However, being realistic, you might not always have the time to do that. So again, I think it's fine if you've got a new staff member starting and you're saying, look, here's a list of people who I think you really need to speak to and the contact details. Like it's okay for you to contact them and get in touch and kind of set up some time to spend with them. So again, I suppose I'm just encouraging you to be honest about what you can and can't do as in your role when you're trying to set this set this up. So that's all the kind of key content that I was going to share. We're going to move on to another poll now, which I'm going to introduce, I think, and then I'm going to pass on to Salma. So our second question for you all is, what are you or were you most concerned about when employing your first member of staff? So option one, getting the legal stuff right. Option two, having the right policies in place. Option three, recruitment. Option four, benchmarking the salary. Or option five, other, put in chat. So again, I'm just going to be quiet for 30 seconds, let the results come in, and then we'll have a look at what the results are. Okay, so there we have it. Right, okay. So 2/3 of you, your biggest concern is around getting the legal stuff, right? Which I get. Well, I'll have a look at what's coming in the other section as well in the chat, and we'll maybe address that when we get to Q&A section. But for now, I'm going to be quiet. Thank you for bearing with me, and I'm handing over to Salma, I think, who's going to talk through your experience, Salma.
Hi everyone, hopefully you can hear me, and it's great to be here. Yes, I'm Salma, I'm CEO of One Roof Leicester, and next slide please, Miriam. Yeah, so just going to really quickly just tell you a little bit about what we do, and then just really move on to the bit that you want to know more about, which is some of our experience at the charity. So we are a small charity in Leicester. We provide accommodation and support to single people who are homeless. So we work with men and women from the age of 18. There's no upper age limit. We work with people who are homeless from the local community. We also work with destitute refugees and asylum seekers and EU migrants, people who have got irregular status as well, so it's quite wide ranging. And recently we've been getting a lot more referrals for couples as well, so we do have accommodation at the moment for couples. So we were established in 2013, which seems like such a long time ago, but gosh, the time has flown as well. So we actually started as a networking organisation, and we had some seed funding back in 2013 where we were able to employ a member of staff to actually look at how we were going to establish the networking forum and what sort of legal entity we wanted to become. So whilst initially I was a volunteer for the networking forum, I was then employed as the first member of staff. But because we didn't have a legal entity, it was just lots of, a cluster of different charities who work in the sector coming together as a forum, that I was actually employed by a member organisation when we first started. And then when we became a charity in 2014, I was then sort of transferred over to One Roof Leicester as the first employee, and then sort of went on to then recruit someone else within sort of like the following year. We now have 8 staff, apart from myself, everybody else is part-time, but we have got a really exciting new project sort of happening this summer, which means that we're going to be growing quite significantly in terms of what we deliver, but we're also going to be employing more staff. So there's always more to learn, there's always more that we could be doing. So it's a forever steep learning curve when it comes to employing staff. Next slide, please. So yeah, so some of the things that I've learned, and it was really interesting on that, especially that when we asked the first question, who would you employ first? Sort of like you had this balance between manager and then an administrator for a lot of people, and that's what we basically did. I was employed initially as the coordinator, and the first person we recruited was an administrator to support the work that we were doing. And then a lot of you in the second question said, yes, you want to get the legal stuff right. And I would probably say that is probably the sort of like the really basic, most important thing is knowing what policies and practices you need to have in place when you first start employing staff. And I think that was sort of one of the first things I did, is to understand a lot of that, to really understand what was in employment law, around the legislation, what we needed to have, and all the sort of like the policies Graham's talked about. Basically, to get that all set up, to make sure that we had all of that in place, I just started attending as many courses as I possibly could. I think I used to check on the ACAS website. I checked NCVO. I checked just even locally, just looked on Eventbrite and places like that. I spoke to some of the other members of the networking forum to find out what courses were available. I sometimes managed to sort of get free attendance on 2 courses that other partners were either running or where they had something which was for their staff, and I'd be just very cheekily ask, can I come along to that as well? And that was, obviously, if we're in the sector, we're always looking for anything that's free, so don't be afraid to ask. And I was really fortunate that one of the members would be like, actually, yes, you can come along to some stuff, and we'll just give you a freebie. So I was always for attending free courses. And then obviously all the free resources you can access. And I think with a lot of the free resources, you then do have to put time and effort into making sure that you've adapted them for your service, for your charity, because they are, as they say, the template resources, they are templates. So you need to make sure that you're adapting them. And I have to say that, if any of you haven't already discovered I Love PDF, you need to get onto there, because that is the best resource to converting anything from a PDF into a Word file. So then you can then adapt things. And I love in Word just the find words, or change things, one stroke of a few strokes of the keyboard and press enter and it does it for you. So make sure you're doing things like that to save yourself time and energy. I haven't used any of these things for AI yet, so if you're really good with AI, there might be a good way to develop some of these policies using AI. But again, make sure they are correct, they meet employment law and legislation, health and safety regulation as well. Sometimes I think we focus so much on employment that we forget about health and safety, which is part of employing staff. I think when it then came on to learning and thinking about recruiting staff, I think that was a really key learning curve for me, was about learning about the whole recruitment process. So not just having the right job description and that induction, but actually thinking a little bit about the sort of onboarding process. So how you meet with, so once you've done your sort of selection and recruitment process, about trying to engage and meet with that person beforehand, thinking about how you are going to put that induction plan together, and having that ongoing staff training and appraisal system in place. Again, all of these things, I mean, whenever we started recruiting staff, I just made sure that I had other people helping me with that process. I didn't recruit anyone. Even to this day, I never recruit anyone on my own. I always make sure that there's a team of at least 2 others, so there's like at least 3 of us that are involved in that recruitment process. So I would ask, again, members from our networking forum that were part of One Roof as the initial members, can you be involved in this process? Who knows more about recruitment than I do? Even the interview questions, are they appropriate? There are questions on the application form. Can I ask this question? Can I not? Just checking all of that and checking all of these things with others that you might have access to. So making sure that you're thinking about equal rights, in equality law as well in all of that process, because that's quite important. Thinking about accessibility issues. So I used to always think about asking that on the interview stage when you've selected someone, making sure that you've thought about all their access issues. That was all like really important as well. And I think for me, the other one that I've had to learn a lot about is performance management. That was something that obviously I was having some appraisals and stuff around my development and my training, but actually making sure that that was quite robust for new members of staff, thinking about what's our appraisal system going to look like, what training and development opportunities can we offer staff, what about mentoring, formal supervision sessions, but also mentoring sessions for your staff. So how do you put all of that in place and making sure there's a bit of structure around that? Because I think sometimes when we get so busy with our sort of day-to-day work and all the things, challenges that we have to deal with, all the, running the charity, but sometimes the stuff around performance management and just going beyond the basic appraisal can all easily be overlooked. So just taking time out and saying, actually, maybe once a quarter, let's go to the coffee shop, let's have a coffee and cake, or grab a bite to eat somewhere away from the office and the normal place of work. So you can just have some time for some sort of like, whether it's an informal or a formal supervision session. And I think that for me was really, really, really important. And then really finally, you know what, this is part of the learning that we go on. It's a journey that we're on and it's never ending. So you just need to be kind to yourself, whether you're a trustee or whether you're the manager and you think about employing somebody new. You really do need to think, how can I be looking after myself? I need to make sure that I'm looking after myself, and just asking for advice and asking for help from whether it's your trustees, from partner organisations, or experts like Graham, taking advantage of the 1 hour free service that they offer. So that's my whistle stop tour of what I learned when we first started recruiting someone.
Thank you. Oh, I'm trying to get my camera now to work. Thank you, Salma. Sorry. That's great. And thank you both. I think those have been really excellent presentations and extremely practical. And a couple of things to follow up on in the Q&A as well. But before we go into that, I'm going to hand back over to you both to do a bit of a fireside chat and talk through some questions. So over to you both.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, and I think this came about, didn't it, Selma, because we were kind of having a chat when we were prepping for this, and there were some questions, and we thought actually it might be useful to kind of chat this through with the kind of delegates on the webinar as well. So I mean, I think it's really interesting and really important to kind of learn from kind of your experience, and I think the conversation we had it's kind of all well and good kind of consultants saying, well, this is the checklist, or these are the policies, or this is the approach that you should take. But actually going through that, living through that, and working through that is kind of really valuable experience and learning to share. I guess the first thing I was interested in, Salma, is like, what obviously, I know you've described how you came into that role initially employed by another organization, but I guess what did you find hardest, kind of as being that first staff member at One Roof Leicester? Like, what would, if I asked you what was the most difficult thing that you had to deal with, what would you say it was?
It's really interesting because actually it is being that first member of staff, being being on your own, and now, like when I've, obviously there's a team around me, that the fact that you've got others on a daily basis to bounce ideas off, to discuss things, explore how you're going to deliver your project to your charity. And at that time, when it's on just you on your own, there's a lot more pressure because it's just you doing all the work. And I was employed for something like, I think it might have been 16 or 18 hours when I first started. So there was just a lot to do in the time that I worked. But it was just almost like, yes, I'm always, and sometimes you just like second guess yourself a little bit because you don't want to always be forever ringing up the trustees or whoever your line manager is and saying, oh, can I just talk this through with you? Or can I talk this through with you? So you are having to, not only are you have to be very self-motivated, but I think, the challenge, reflecting on it now, I think, the hardest thing was just being the only employee on your own, and managing that, especially when you're quite sociable and you like being around people.
Did it feel quite lonely then at times?
Yeah, it really did. And because of the way we're set up, like I said, it was a networking forum with lots of, I think it had something like 8 or 10 different members, with all different views. So you'd get a call from one member saying, oh, I think we should be doing it this way. And then another member would be like, no, we don't want to be doing it that way. We want to do it this way. And you're almost like, you've got like, almost felt like having 10 different bosses at some times. So it was really challenging. And I think, having that now, again, it's like making sure that there's really clear line management systems in place. So if you're the chair of trustees, you are line managing that first recruit. I mean, if you're not, then who else is it? And then actually, making sure that, as the trustees, making sure that your new employee is not feeling lonely or being just left to it.
Yeah. Okay. Amazing. And how, I guess one other thing I was interested in is how, to what extent was the role kind of clearly defined when you started and kind of clearly set out, or to what extent did you have to kind of develop that and kind of evolve it and shape it as you kind of settled into the job?
Yeah, it's always really interesting that, because like you talked about earlier, you have this job description, and sometimes it can be all singing and dancing, sometimes it can be too much and too much information, or sometimes it can just be a bit too vague. I think with mine, it was developed to enable us to get this seed funding, but I think it was quite ambitious as well at some level in terms of what we thought we could achieve or what we thought we wanted the role to be. And I think once the work started, it was really quite clear that it needed to take a slightly different direction to what they initially, and so there was some change that had to be made. There was, sort of, and again, I didn't sort of go in there and say, I'm going to make all these changes. It was a learning process. It was like, okay, let's start. This is what trustees wanted. And this is what we said we'd do within the job description. But then going back to the trustees and saying, actually, this isn't going to work. We do need to make some changes. But at the same time, talking to the funder as well. And I think that was really key, because obviously the seed funding came from a funder who we'd said, oh, this is what we're going to do. So keeping them aware of it as well. I mean, I don't think it changed too much, but we did have to change it because it wasn't, I think, what we thought we'd achieve in the time frame that we had with the funding that we had was quite unrealistic, to be honest, because it was a big piece of work when we first, because it was about not just because it was about not just deciding on what was going to be the legal framework for this new networking forum, and eventually it became a charity, so having to set all of that up. But there was other parts to the grant application that we put in that was just, it was like, okay, that's just not going to happen. So yeah, so it was there was some changes.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's kind of inevitable to some extent, isn't it? Even if there's loads of thought and preparation gone into what the role looks like, what the priorities are. Again, you've just made me think, I suppose, again, one piece of advice to people who are in this situation thinking about bringing in the first member of staff is maybe be honest about that. In the job description, you can, in the job advert, you can say you will be the first member of staff that we've employed. So we have a job description, but we're happy to kind of evolve that and shape that as we learn more about kind of the priorities and kind of how this role can add value to the charity. And for some people applying, that'll be a real positive, right? That makes it quite exciting. Yeah, actually, I'll be the first person doing this job. I get to shape this a little bit. Did you spend much? Yeah, sorry, go on.
Now I'm going to say, and I don't think for like different people that we've employed since then, I don't think there's any job description that stayed the same since we, so if we've taken on, so like my job description's it's changed so many times now over the years, but even the other members of the administrators' job descriptions, so every time we're sort of like looking at either we're doing we're looking at recruiting because, somebody's either moved on or their job role has changed, we go back and have a look at the job description and make the changes again, because in many cases, like somebody will ask the administrator, so can you have a look at this job description and tell us what's changed? They'll be like, don't do that, but I do this and I do this. So yeah, I think that's quite important.
Yeah. And to what extent, kind of when you started, how much of your time was spent kind of setting up new systems and processes and policies then? Was that a big part of what you had to do kind of initially?
Yeah, definitely. Especially in preparation for sort of, again, that new other member of, I would say the first member of staff. I know I was the first, but having to get all of that policy and documentation in place was really important. I mean, I was really fortunate that a partner organisation literally just gave me a pack and said, here's all our documents, and then having to go through them because there was just a lot. But it was, like I said earlier, that whilst you get all these free resources, they're not going to suit your organisation. So you need to make sure that, one, they suit you as an organisation, what your values are, but also at the same time, making sure that if there's been some legislative changes, that those are reflected in those documents. So again, it's one of those things that even now, with the new employment law changes, we're already like reviewing our documents and making sure that our contracts are still appropriate, our policies are still up to date and appropriate. So you do spend a lot of time on all of those things.
Amazing. I guess the last thing I was going to ask you, because I want to make sure we've got a bit of time for Q&A, Salma, but again, if you could give one piece of advice then to people on this call about kind of recruiting a staff member for the first time, what would it be? What would be your one kind of main piece of advice for people?
Apart from what I said earlier, I think the other thing is, I don't think I've really talked about, is that you're not always going to get it right. You are going to employ people, and it is going to be difficult and challenging. I've had capability issues. I've had issues with underperformance. Sometimes you realise that people have come with different challenges, and you've got to manage all of that. And again, reach out and get support. And I think what you said earlier, when you said that, if you've got to have difficult conversations, have them on as early as possible. Don't just sort of like leave it thinking, oh, it'll just correct itself. It won't. It just gets worse, and it actually creates a lot more stress for you. And I think the amount of sleepless nights I've had because I dreaded having a difficult conversations, whereas now it's almost like grab the bull by the horn, or what the expression is, and just have that. And one of the things I've started to do is said to staff is, how do you like getting feedback? Are you one of those people who like a feedback sandwich, good, bad, and good? Or are you somebody who wants something really direct? And they've told me, and I was like, okay, that's it. So I know now, and that's how I give feedback. But if you're having a difficult, if there are some difficult decisions that need making, or difficult conversations you need to have, you need to do them as soon as possible. Just don't let it fester, don't leave it. And I think that's, it's just really, really found that that's really, really important. I think that was something that I always dreaded, but now it's like, okay, just need to get on with it. But yeah, so if you have to have a difficult conversation, have it as soon as possible. Don't leave it.
Yeah, amazing. And I massively agree, by the way, Salma, that you will not always get it right. Even the best recruiters sometimes appoint people where it ends up not being the right fit or not being the right person for the role. I think we'll probably talk in the Q&A a bit about probation period, because I know a couple of people were asking about that in the chat. So I think we're handing back to you now, Josie, aren't we, for Q&A?
Yeah, great. Thank you both. It's amazing. It's really nice, like what comes out of that kind of fireside chat, and some really nice bits of guidance and top tips. So thank you both. Okay, moving on then to the Q&A. So yeah, I think the first question is around probation periods. I think there's something about the requirements around probation period, and how much notice do you need to give people notice if you're getting rid of them before their probation period ends. Also, like different time periods for different levels of responsibility during probation periods, and kind of, is that acceptable? So yeah, maybe just talk us through probation periods a bit more, Graham.
Yeah, no problem. Should I go first, and then Salma, if you've got anything to add, or you think I've missed anything, you chip in. So I think if I start off with a bit which is about notice periods, then. So again, there is no right or wrong with notice periods. Again, I think it's the norm for the higher the level of pay, the more seniority, the more responsibility, to expect a longer notice period. So I would say the most common when I'm working with charities is if you've got a chief executive role, that's probably kind of three months notice would be relatively standard. For kind of manager roles, if you've got a charity manager role, that might be 2 months. For other roles, generally 1 month is the norm. I think the key with notice periods, it's about mutuality. So if you're expecting somebody to give you 3 months notice, then you should be giving them 3 months notice if you're ending the employment. So again, it's just thinking about kind of that's where the risk comes in around notice period, which is around whatever you're going to expect them to give you, you should be willing to give them in terms of notice. In terms of the link with probation then, so again, it would be quite common within a contract of employment for it to say, your notice period is 2 months or however long. During your probationary period, the notice period for either party is 1 week or 2 weeks. So you can stipulate within the contract a lower notice period within the probation period. But that does, again, that applies to both parties. So again, beware that, if you're going to give somebody less notice, they should be giving you less as well. I think in terms of, so the question around probation period and how it works, again, there's no absolutes here. There's no right answer. So at the minute, probation periods are ill-defined in law. So really what I'm talking about is standard practice, or what some of the norms are within the sector. Again, when you're setting a length of a probation period, I think the key question for me is, how long do you need for you and for the person you've employed to make a really good, informed decision about whether this is the right role, whether they're doing well? I think in most cases, I think 6 months it probably takes 6 months to make a really well-informed view. Some organizations we work with might say, oh, it won't take that long, we can do it in 3 months. That's kind of fine, as long as you feel like that's going to give you enough information and data to know that somebody's doing well. And then I think Nikki's question was specifically around what do you do in terms of notice. So again, for me, if you are going to end somebody's employment at the end of the probation period or during the probation period, I think good practice would be that that should never come as a surprise. If you reach the point where you're saying to somebody, look, I'm really sorry this isn't working, I'm going to fail your probation, and it's a shock to them, something has gone wrong, right? So by that point, they should have had feedback. You should have been saying, look, we've got some concerns in these areas. We really want you to demonstrate improvement by the time we get to the end of your probation period. Again, if you're doing this well, you should be saying to somebody, unless we see improvement in these areas, there could be a risk that you might fail your probation. So again, I know sometimes those conversations can be hard, but exactly like Salma said, like you're not, if you avoid those conversations, you're not doing anybody any favors. And again, like I mentioned at the start, if you reach a point where you're failing somebody's probation, then you would be giving them the notice that's set out in the contract. You might, again, if it's reached that point, rather than you're probably not going to expect that person to work their notice period, so you would normally be paying them in lieu of notice instead of expecting them to work the notice if you fail in a probation. I think I've answered those questions, Josie, but I don't know, Salma, whether you've got anything to add, or Josie, if there's anything else you think's worth me saying.
No, I think what we have is very similar to what you said. So the notice period will differ depending on the level of the employee. So we did have it where everybody was the same. I think it was a couple of years ago, I think it was a month for everybody because it hadn't changed. And I think then it suddenly hit the trustees that actually, okay, you're the CEO, we can't possibly let you just have 1 month notice period. That would be quite detrimental. And I think that's what you need to assess. What, as part of that, you need to think about is how long do you need that person's notice period to be? Because if they leave within, sort of like a month or 2 months' time, is that enough time for you to recruit someone else and have some kind of handover period as well, if you want a handover period? So it's really thinking about what you need as a charity, so that it works for you as well as for the employees. And I think the probation, it's like you said, Graham, we just have now a standard. Again, we used to have it for a month when we first started and realised quite quickly on that a month isn't long enough, because you're probably spending the first 2 to 3 weeks just on induction if you've done a good induction pack. So 4 weeks wasn't enough. So we extended that to six months. And within that, like you said earlier, Graham, is that making sure that if there are capability issues, is there underperformance, that we're actually having a plan to address these things. And if after every attempt at trying to improve somebody's performance hasn't worked, then in that probationary period at the end of it, you would say, unfortunately, it's not working out.
Yeah, I think that covers it, Graham. Thank you, and Salma, thank you. There was one question that came through when you, Graham, when you were talking about the policies to have in place around, do people need to have a recruitment policy? So that was one kind of question. And then I guess someone did mention, which I think is a valid point, around, obviously we're talking to policies that you need to have in place, particularly when thinking about employing your first member of staff, but just recognizing that a lot of organizations work with volunteers, and therefore a volunteer policy would also be relevant for many. So it was just really to add that on for clarification. But yeah, on the recruitment policy.
Yeah, again, I think for organizations, it would be good practice have a recruitment policy. Again, just something simple that sets out what is our standard approach. So when we have a vacancy, when we have an opportunity, are we going to advertise it internally first? Are we, how do we make sure that we're applying an equitable and fair and transparent process? So I definitely think it's good practice. Again, I think there's an element of trying to be realistic, which is that, that's probably not going to be one of the first half a dozen policies I'm drafting or getting in place. But I think certainly as you start to grow, I would be thinking about introducing that. And again, even if you're starting off with kind of an off-the-shelf template that you're then tweaking a little bit for your organization. Yeah.
Cool, thank you. And then just, I think, two final quick questions, which I'm going to try and squeeze in. One is, do you know what that registration process with HMRC kind of looks like? Any more sort of detail there? Yes, let's start with that.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think Jacob also asked if there was a fee. So as far as I'm aware, it's free. I have to admit, I mean, it's years since I've been on this. My recollection is, again, it's just sharing your basic company information. Yeah, so you kind of headline details in terms of what you do and contact details. So my recollection is I think it's quite straightforward, but please don't hold me to that if it's developed, Jacob, and it's massively complex. But I don't. Last time I went on it, it was really straightforward.
Great, thank you. And then there was one question in the chat around, do right to work checks apply to freelancers? Do you know?
God, this is where I wish it wasn't recorded, so I can't be held to this.
It's okay, we can follow up on it.
I will give my position, but I'll check this and then follow up if it's any different to what I say. So my understanding is, no, I don't think they do. So if there's not a contract of employment, then as far as I'm aware, there is no requirement for you to check that status. But I will double check that because obviously our specialist is our specialism is employing people, and you can engage in contracts for services with people across the globe, right? You can engage with you can have a contract for service for somebody based in all different countries and places of work. They are their own employer, so they are responsible for their own kind of right to work, for paying taxes within the right tax system in the right country. So to my knowledge, there is no requirement when you're engaging with contractors to be checking right to work. If it's any different, I will get in touch with you as a follow-up. Is that all right, Josie?
That's absolutely fine. We can put a comment in the follow-up email when we send it, just to clarify that, or just to make sure we've got that right. No problem. Okay. That's all the questions that we've had in. So I'm going to move on. Before we sort of just finish up and signpost you to some further tools and resources, which will also be highlighted in our follow-up email, I just wanted to move forward onto our sort of online poll evaluation. So hopefully any second now, a snap poll will appear on your screen. Basically, it's just to get some initial thoughts about how you found the webinar today. So if you can just spare a second or two to do that. There will also be some short feedback, a form appearing in your browser when you leave today's webinar. So please do take the time to fill that out. We really do value the feedback, and yeah, we do look to make improvements based on that. So hopefully you should see a snap poll appearing now. I'm not sure, it's not coming up on my screen. Ah, there we go. So here it is. So yeah, just to give us your thoughts on how satisfied you are, and hopefully you have learned something today that you can take back to your role or organisation. So yeah, thank you very much for your feedback. I'll give people just a few more seconds to do that. Okay, thank you very much for that. Just moving on to some further support and guidance on the next slide, please. So just in terms of, yeah, some signposting. So as Graham and Salma, I think have mentioned, we do on our NCVO site have lots of help and guidance, and specifically stuff on employing and managing staff. So discussions around, you know, using template policies and procedures. So you can absolutely use these as an NCVO member. And we have those, I think pretty much all of the ones you mentioned, Graham, are available as templates on our site. We do also have some guidance on salary benchmarking and also some guidance on recruitment. So as well as Atkinson HR, we also have a number of other HR trusted suppliers that can help you recruit and support your staff. So I've put a link, the second link is to those. Just to mention again, our small charity help desk. So that's open Monday to Friday, 10 to 4. And yeah, we offer information and guidance on really anything to do with setting up and running a charity. And then finally, yeah, just re-mentioning ACAS, which, you know, gives employers and employees kind of free impartial advice and guidance. Moving on to the next slide. So I guess it's really just for me to say thank you. Thank you, Graham. Thank you, Salma. I think today has been super useful, super practical. It's exactly what we aim to make these webinars. So yeah, thank you both very much. And also I must say thank you to Holly and Miriam, who have been kindly producing this webinar, and my colleagues at NCVO. So thank you very much, guys. Please, as I say, do give us some more feedback. And if you are not already a member of NCVO, and particularly if you're small and have an income of under 30K, yeah, do consider joining us. So yeah, thank you, everyone, and hope to see you again.